Hello and welcome back to the Finding Hope with Overcoming MS webinar series season 4. We're pleased to bring you today's session and continue with our Ask format. And today we'll be welcoming Sam Josephs, a nutritional therapist and Overcoming MS facilitator. So my name is Jake Connor and I am the Community Engagement Project Officer, joining you from Manchester in the UK. And in a moment, I will be welcoming Sam to the virtual stage for our very popular and interactive session this evening. But before I do that, I just want to run through a little bit of housekeeping to help keep the webinar running as smoothly as possible for you. So just to note that the session is being recorded and you'll receive a link to the recording next week. And you'll also notice that because it's a Zoom webinar this evening, there isn't an audio or video component for webinar participants. However, it will still be an interactive session as you'll be able to ask a question using the Q&A tab, and we'll try and get through as many of those as possible. And we also have some pre-submitted questions to go through as well. If you do experience any technical glitches, please do try leaving the webinar and re-entering using the link on your email. And for best results, we do recommend using a Chrome browser to access the webinar. So we've also tried to make the webinar sessions even more accessible, and today we are going to be using closed captioning, which look like subtitles at the bottom of your screen. But if you do want to take these off, then you can do so just by clicking on the button at the bottom of your screen as well. And as you exit the webinar, there'll be a short survey that pops up automatically, which we would really appreciate you filling in, as it does help us to shape future webinars going forward. So without further ado, I would really love to welcome Sam to the virtual stage.
Hello.
Hi, Sam. How are you?
Yes, very good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks so much for joining us today, and for agreeing to run an Ask webinar. We do have a lot of questions to get through that people have submitted. But I think just for starter, for those people who haven't had the pleasure of obviously watching one of your webinars before, would you mind just sort of introducing yourself and telling the viewers a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Sam Josephs. I am a registered nutritional therapist. I qualified back in 2008. And I have a particular interest in multiple sclerosis because my husband, Danny, was diagnosed in 2002. So since being a nutritional therapist, word has really got out about my personal connection to MS. And I now see a high proportion of my clients are people from the MS community. So it's something I'm dealing with every day. Our sort of personal journey with OMS started really when the book was published, sort of early teens, I think it was the early sort of 2012, something like that. And we've been more and more compliant on the OMS program, culminating with our first retreat in 2018, when Danny went completely OMS friendly. And since then, since 2018, I've been a part of the Facilitator team, with running retreats and speaking at public events, hosting webinars, this kind of thing.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. As I say, we've got quite a lot of questions, so should we just dive straight in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go for it. So question number 1. Do you know anything about fasting and fasting mimicking diets for people with MS? And is it recommended to do fasting if you do have MS? Can it be helpful?
Yes, short answer. Intermittent fasting has been gaining huge amounts of popularity in the media. I think lots of people are familiar with the concept. So it can be done in a few different ways. Some people perhaps want to do something like the 5-2 diet, which involves eating normally 5 days of the week and then maybe just eating dinner on 2 days of the week, consuming much lower calories. It can be done as a time restricted eating pattern. So you could fast overnight for 16 hours and then eat your food in a much smaller window of 8 hours. It could be done as a water fast where you don't eat anything at all and just drink water 1 day a week or a couple of days a month. So there are lots of different ways to introduce the idea of fasting, but it's really gaining a lot of credibility, and there's a lot of research behind it now about how it's generally very good for our health. It's very good for our cardiovascular health, which often ties in as well with brain health. And then more specifically, there have been some very convincing studies with mice, with animals, using the MS model in mice and putting them on a intermittent fasting pattern, maybe just allowing them to eat every other day. And they've really shown some quite dramatic effects. They've been able to reduce inflammation, reduce the damage of the neurons, and actually reduce the demyelination mechanisms that are going on as well. There's been less studies done on people, but there's still been a good handful of studies that haven't run for very long, maybe just a couple of months, and not very large groups of people, 30, 40 people, usually with a relapsing remitting type of MS. And these people have also shown improvements in fatigue, improvements in quality of life. In one study, improvements in disability scores as well. One of the latest pieces of research that was just recently presented at ACTRIMS, which is the big conference for MS neurologists, and all latest research demonstrated a really positive benefit for people doing something like the 5-2 program. So 5 days of eating normally, 2 days of fasting, and really showed improvements in cognitive health. So I think short answer is yes. It is a very useful adjunctive tool to managing MS. And one of the easiest ways to do it, I think, is time-restricted eating, which has been shown beneficial as well. Yeah,
Brilliant. Yeah,
because I can go on, and I'm expecting
yeah,
we're going to get more questions, so I'm going to stop there.
yeah. So the evidence is there, and there's lots of variations that people could do with fasting diets as well.
Yeah, and actually a lot of the studies that were done on people, the human studies, some of those people were taking medications, some of them were in the middle of relapses. So some quite interesting, robust indications of how useful it can be.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Sam. So question number 2, it's quite a long one. So I'm trying to get all of my calcium intake from oily fish with bones in, for example, half a portion every day, as well as many vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds, and I can't eat soy. Is it a good idea for me to also find a clean, oil-free vegetable-based milk that's fortified with calcium, or is that as risky for us as taking an actual calcium supplement, given the amount of vitamin D3 we take?
So that's quite interesting. I mean, vitamin D increases the absorption of calcium. So people following the Overcoming MS program will have very good levels of vitamin D, because that is one of the arms of the program. So calcium absorption from the plant-based foods and other foods like fish with small bones will be well absorbed. I don't think that you would be at great risk if you were to take a small calcium supplement if you'd been advised that your calcium levels were low, or if you're at risk of osteoporosis. I don't see that the vitamin D would have such a powerful effect to take calcium levels to a dangerous point at all. Certainly, using fortified milks is another nice way to bring calcium into the diet. I found that the Blue Diamond brand for almond milk. It's quite a nice one that doesn't have extra oils and is fortified with calcium. So yes, I would say it would be a good way to boost calcium if it's something that you believe that you're low in or you need to increase.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. So just as sort of a caveat from that question, this person has also said, so with the amount of oily fish, nuts, seeds and vegetables that I'm eating, I've realized I'm actually getting about 4 or 5 grams per day of omega-3 if I'm absorbing my foods efficiently. So would it be okay for me to also have a tablespoon or 2 of flax oil as well?
Yes, definitely. So even though you're doing really well to include lots of foods that are rich in omega-3, first of all, the fact that you have MS means that you are going to find it more difficult than someone without MS because of your genetic profile to actually absorb and break down and metabolize the omega-3 that you're consuming. And the omega-3 that's available in plant foods, not the oily fish, but from the plant foods, is again much harder to actually break down and convert into the active component of omega-3 for the anti-inflammatory effect. So I would say that although you may believe that you're consuming 4 or 5 grams of omega-3, you're unlikely to be actually assimilating that much into the body. So absolutely, I would supplement the diet with extra flaxseed oil.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So the next one's quite an interesting one. So this person is from Denmark, and they've said that there are very few meat and dairy free options at restaurants, and typically there's only one vegan option, and it's usually dal with coconut milk. So this person has said, how bad is coconut milk compared to meat and dairy? And can you eat coconut milk once in a while, or is it better to just totally avoid it?
Okay, so coconut milk is very high in saturated fat, which is why it's not recommended as part of the Overcoming MS diet. However, it does not contain the arachidonic acid, which is the inflammatory fat that is contained in meat and red meat. So in that respect, I would say it was preferable to the meat. Again, the reason we avoid dairy is not just because of the saturated fat component, but it's because of the process of molecular mimicry, whereby some of the proteins in dairy mimic myelin and could potentially facilitate the T cell attack on myelin. So if we're weighing up goods and bads, I would say definitely choosing coconut milk occasionally when you're out with a dal curry for dinner is a really good beneficial choice over meat and dairy. And you want to be able to go out and eat, and you want to be able to go enjoy socially with your friends. And really across the week, if your overall saturated fat intake is very low, then really, you know, one curry with some coconut milk here and there would be absolutely fine.
Brilliant, thank you. So the next question that we've got is from somebody who said, I drink fortified soy milk as part of my diet and felt quite confident that I was getting additional vitamin D through this. I have about 700 milliliters to 1 liter daily. However, I recently realized that this is actually vitamin D2 and wonder what the difference is to D3, and is it actually valid to count in my daily intake?
Okay, interesting question. So I'm not sure if this person, if you're taking a vitamin D supplement as well, and you're hoping to just boost your overall vitamin D intake by having the fortified milk. But the difference between D2 and D3, they both have to be converted in the liver to become active. And the D3 does that much more efficiently and does it much longer. It has a much longer life at doing that. So it's much more efficient at raising vitamin D levels and storing vitamin D levels long term. So vitamin D2 is generally not considered as efficient or as active as vitamin D3. something else I was going to say. I think the most important thing to do is to test your vitamin D levels if you're concerned, because if you test them, and you can do it very easily, I think most countries will offer a home test kit, a simple blood test, and check your levels. You're aiming for something more than 150 nanomoles, which works out at more than 60 nanograms in the American, Australian version of vitamin D measures. And so that's really the best way, is to work out what your levels are and then to supplement. But you're correct in thinking the amount of vitamin D that you're getting from fortified soy milk is nowhere near close to what we recommend on the OMS program, which could be up to 10,000 international units a day. So,
okay, brilliant, thank you. So this next person has said that they are 55 years old, they have MS, and they've been following the Overcoming MS diet for several years, and they're doing quite well on it. They have said, I know the Overcoming MS diet normally provides enough calcium, but I have osteoporosis, so my recommended daily intake is higher, and then they've said it's 1200 milligrams. Even with a healthy and varied Overcoming MS diet, getting to this amount or anywhere close is impossible without eating dairy. My GP says that I should eat dairy, but obviously the Overcoming MS diet says definitely not to. What should I do?
I'm afraid I would disagree with the GP. I would say, because you have MS, we would not recommend that you consume dairy, because, as I said, it may well be instigating further inflammation and attack on the myelin sheath directly through the process of molecular mimicry. And there's also a lot of conflicting evidence around whether dairy actually does improve osteoporosis. What we see in the literature, we see big population studies where we know that those countries that consume more dairy have higher rates of osteoporosis. There are lots of studies, some showing that there is no relationship between high dairy consumption and robust bones and stronger bones and osteoporosis. And in fact, I think it was the nurses cohort study. So this is a huge study running over a long period of time, over 77,000 self-reporting people, actually demonstrated that by those people that were consuming more dairy, drinking an extra 1.5 glasses of milk daily, were at greater risk of hip fracture. So for someone who is battling osteoporosis, really, I think probably a calcium supplement, but a calcium supplement together with those other minerals that are very important to help lock the calcium into the bones. So you'll be getting good levels of vitamin D to absorb the calcium from the diet, but it might be worth looking for a good quality bone support nutritional supplement that gives you extra vitamin K, the boron, the magnesium, all those other minerals and vitamins as well that help protect against osteoporosis. And those minerals are often in a lot of the plant foods where we find calcium, which is why studies have shown that, like for like, 100 grams of dairy foods versus 100 grams of kale, you actually get more kale and you absorb it better into your bones. Sorry, you get more calcium from the kale and absorb it better into your bones than you do from the dairy foods. So it's as much about controlling your excretion of calcium, which happens when you have a very high protein diet, a diet that's very rich in animal proteins. So having a more plant-focused diet, like the Overcoming MS diet, actually protects against calcium loss. So again, maybe discuss testing calcium levels with the GP, but I would feel confident and reassured that if you were eating a very healthy, plant-focused, whole food diet like the OMS program, that you'd be getting enough calcium along with all the other nutrients. And then there's always bone support supplement there if you need it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. Perfect. So I know you mentioned before, you mentioned about saturated fats. So this person has asked, are there different types of saturated fats? And is it true that people on the Overcoming MS diet should limit their intake of avocado and fatty fish due to saturated fat? Which amount is appropriate?
Yes, so there are different types of saturated fat, but together they're all collectively known as saturated. But the interesting point to remember is that foods that are considered fatty are generally never just completely one type of fat. There will always be a combination of all the different fats. They are labeled as being a polyunsaturated fat or a saturated fat due to the domination of whichever fat is most prevalent. So you're absolutely right. There is some saturated fat in an avocado, but the primary fat in an avocado is monounsaturated fat. And this type of fat is also found in olive oil, nuts and seeds, and it has a very anti-degenerative effect on the body. In terms of portion size, because there is a small amount of saturated fat, maybe 1.5 grams of saturated fat in half an avocado versus about 7.5 grams of the monounsaturated fat. We say limiting avocado portion sizes to about half an avocado in one sitting, and maybe sort of 3 times a week or 3 to 4 times a week. Similarly, oily fish is predominantly the good fat, the omega-3 fat, but yes, there is some saturated fat. And it seems to be with the studies, the Holism study, which was looking at 2,500 people all around the world, found that those people that were eating 3 portions a week were the ones that seemed to be experiencing less disease progression and exacerbation of symptoms. So sticking to 3 portions of oily fish a week should be the way forward.
Okay, so 3 portions of oily fish and half an avocado around 3 times a week would be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. 3 to 4 times a week.
Brilliant. Thank you. So a question that was submitted on the Q&A is from somebody that said, I'm just starting on the Overcoming MS diet, and similar to the coconut milk question that we went through before, how detrimental is it to have occasional processed food or fast food, etc.?
Okay, there's a big difference there, I think, between processed food and fast food. For me, fast food is generally something that will be deep fried. And so that's something that I would think we try and steer clear of as much as possible. It's not good for anybody in our population at all, anywhere. And particularly because of the bad fats, because of the oxidation of fats, the inflammation and degenerative properties that they bring would really be best avoided. So for me, fast foods, I would say try and leave them as much as possible. And for people starting out on the OMS diet, it might be that they're cutting down, reducing frequency, and that's fine as long as you've got your eye on the end game, which is trying to completely eliminate the fast foods. I think that's fine. The highly processed foods, really, they have a lot of chemicals that we don't really know what the effect is. We know that they sometimes irritate the gut lining, that they can affect our friendly bacteria populations. And we're only just really starting to understand the detrimental effect of some of these unknown food chemicals, not to mention high levels of salt, high levels of sugar, all of which on a metabolic level are not good for us. The salt can cause excretion of calcium, which we're trying to retain, and the sugars can cause metabolic issues, things like becoming overweight and obese. But having said that, it's difficult to eliminate them completely from our diet because of the way the supermarkets are structured, because of the way that we are fed this opportunity for a quick, fast, get a meal together. So I would recommend looking at some of the labels, and you might find in the supermarket sort of various highly processed foods can be switched for a different brand that might be similar in terms of the speed of which it can provide a meal, but might be lower in the number of ingredients. We're looking, you know, just how many things are packed into it. So I think, again, ideally, we're looking to avoid them as much as possible and stay on a whole food diet. But if there are times when it's going to be very stressful, you've got to get a quick meal together, that stress can be really detrimental as well. So occasionally, I'll have to leave it up to the individual and the individual choice, because I'm not looking at the food label. But
so try to cut out if possible, or swap for alternatives that are more sort of whole food alternatives.
And work towards doing it more consistently and more completely, even if it's not happening today, this week.
So try to adopt maybe a habit of doing that. Okay, brilliant. So the next question is about egg yolks. So this person has said, I know egg yolks aren't allowed on the Overcoming MS diet. I presume this is due to saturated fat. Is this correct? And if so, would it be okay to eat an egg yolk every now and then, for example, in ramen when eating out?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Saturated fat is contained within the yolk of the egg, whereas the white part of the egg is very high in protein, very low in saturated fat. Apart from that, there isn't a huge reason to avoid eggs, in my opinion. So if you've had a really great OMS friendly week, the occasional egg yolk in a ramen, but similarly enjoying the egg white and leaving the egg yolk if you prefer as well.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So the next question is probably testing your maths skills here, so apologies.
Give it a go.
It says, how many capsules of 1,000 milligrams of flaxseed oil are equivalent to 40 milliliters of liquid oil?
Okay, so 1,000 milligrams of oil is equal to 1,000 milliliters. So no, that's not right, is it? 1,000 milligrams is basically equivalent to a gram, which is the same as a milliliter. So you would need 40 capsules.
Okay.
So that's why, because really a capsule of flaxseed oil is just a capsule that contains flaxseed. So if you were to snip them all open and pour them all out, it would take you 40 capsules to fill 40 milliliters.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of explaining it. Definitely.
Yeah, so that's why we recommend going for the oil, and spoonfuls of oil, drizzling it on your salads, drizzling it on soup, spritzing it on toast, as a more effective way of getting it rather than just having the capsules.
Yeah, definitely. Great ideas there. So this person has said that they follow the Overcoming MS diet as it seems to help reduce their fatigue. And they've said, I'd like to understand more about the relationship between dietary fats and my symptoms. Is the inflammation a chronic condition, or is it an acute reaction to what I've eaten that day or very recently? Could you say what would happen to my body if I ate steak, for example, once a month?
Okay, so the inflammation that's going on is a chronic state of inflammation that is created by the mechanisms of multiple sclerosis and the regulation of the T cells. You have more of the pro-inflammatory T cells that are more active, and there are much less of the regulatory dampening T cells. So the state that people with relapsing remitting MS are in is a chronic state of inflammation. Having steak once a month means that you're bringing into the body quite high levels of a pro-inflammatory fat. When someone with MS consumes a meal, they are much more likely to consume the saturated fat component of that meal before they assimilate the polyunsaturated part, just because of the way the genes are and the way the uptake of fats occurs in somebody with MS. So the fat is then taken up and it's put into the cell membranes of all our cells. And those cell membranes need to be mostly omega-3 because it's nice and pliable, and a flexible oil because it's unsaturated. The saturated ones are saturated and they're very rigid. And if they're taken up into the cell membranes, they make cell membranes very rigid. And that means the communication between the cells can be dampened, can be impeded, and the signals that the cell gives off will be more pro-inflammatory as well. So it's about thinking about how you assimilate fats into your body. So I think if you're trying to give up red meat, thinking about doing having red meat just once a month is a really good way to start. But maybe seeing if you can reduce it a bit more over time. Can you go to once every 6 months? Can you just try once? You know, again, it's kind of finding that balance of thinking long term where you're going to be with the Overcoming MS diet. So
yeah, it's like you mentioned before, trying to eliminate it as much as you can, but always having in your mind that end goal of where you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
It's working towards something, working towards a more true state of following the Overcoming MS diet, because that's where the research is. The research was done on the recommendations for the Overcoming MS diet. So sticking to the recommendations as much as possible does bring the best outcome.
Yeah, definitely. Perfect. Thanks, Sam. So this next one, for those of us taking 7,500 to 10,000 IU of vitamin D3, is it necessary to also take magnesium and vitamin K? And if so, which vitamin K and how much?
Is it necessary to take magnesium? No, not necessarily. And vitamin K, reasonably small levels, 150 micrograms is usually sufficient. We get vitamin K in lots of leafy green vegetables. We get it in whole grains like oats and asparagus. It's quite easy to come across in the diet. If you're following the Overcoming MS diet and you're eating a whole food, plant-focused diet, you're going to be getting lots of vitamin K as well. But the reason we combine vitamin K with high levels of vitamin D is that it prevents the calcium building up in soft tissues. So there's a supplement by Seeking Health, which is 5,000 IUs of vitamin D together with vitamin K. It's one of the best ones that I found, one of the highest levels. So that's the one that I like to use because people call vitamin K as like a gatekeeper. It stops the overabsorption of calcium going to the wrong places.
Right, brilliant, thank you. So following on from the question around egg yolks, somebody has asked, is there a limit for the amount of egg whites per day or per week?
No, not as such. Egg white can be really helpful ingredient for binding foods and recipes and things. But then similarly, an egg white omelette can be a nice, an egg white omelette or scramble could be a nice breakfast or lunch. I'm going to say that any food, if you eat it in crazy amounts or too much of it, probably there'll be something that will be negative. So just put a little caveat on that. I'm not sure how many egg whites this person's thinking of consuming, but
disclaimer.
Yeah, but no, I'm kind of unlimited within reason. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, thank you. So this next person has said, My understanding is that the Overcoming MS diet does not include meat in order to eliminate saturated fat, which is obviously what we've discussed. However, even a vegetarian diet includes saturated fat. So is it possible to follow the principles of the Overcoming MS diet whilst including some meat? And this person said they struggle with weight loss and find it difficult to consume enough calories.
Right. So yes, the saturated fat content is an important part of why we exclude red meat, but generally land animals and consumption of land animal meat has been linked to and associated with general poorer health outcomes in large population studies, which is one of the reasons why it's not on the OMS program. Again, the type of fat, this arachidonic acid, which is actually an omega-6 fat, not a saturated fat, and is quite high levels of it in all meat, again, is pro-inflammatory. So it's not as simple as just being saturated fat content. If you look at the saturated fat content of a chicken breast without the skin, it's actually quite low. So if you are struggling with weight loss and you believe that including small amounts of meat is going to protect against losing muscle mass, is going to protect against losing too much weight, then skinless white chicken breasts once in a while would be something that I would say would be appropriate and would be okay. The actual saturated fat content is reasonably low.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. We're flying through these questions. If anybody obviously who's watching, if you have any other questions, please do send them in on the Q&A tab and we'll try and answer them as well. But yeah, so the next one, somebody has said, I find that the intake of carbohydrates and sugar, and then in brackets fruit, cause spasticity. Are there any studies on this that you know of? As I find that the spasticity is relieved with sports electrolyte drying, increased water intake, magnesium captures, and Epsom salts bath.
Yeah. So no, I don't know about any connection between fruits and spasticity, but it is a very uncomfortable and serious symptom of MS. This is when the muscles become very tight and constricted. So absolutely something like electrolytes, particularly magnesium, which is the relaxing mineral. The calcium helps muscles contract and magnesium helps muscles release. So yes, certainly using magnesium products would be a good way to counteract that. Epsom salt baths are magnesium sulfate, which is absorbed transdermally through the skin, which is really nice for people. Some people can be sensitive to too much magnesium in supplement form because it can have the effect of loosening the bowel. So Epsom salts transdermally can be a nice way to get good levels of magnesium and to reduce spasticity. But I'm afraid I don't know of any connection between fruit and spasticity. I'm going to look it up though when we're finished because
it's interesting, isn't it? Definitely. So this it's quite topical actually. I hear this in the community quite a bit. So is the Overcoming MS diet something that can be easily integrated into a very busy schedule? My challenge is finding the energy to cook and do a lot of prep.
Yeah, and I think that I hear that a lot from people as well. And I think that it's something that overwhelms people when they're new to the program. For people that have been doing the program for some time, they've already learned some tips and tricks and hacks that sort of easy to make meals that can be quick. Something like a quick vegetable tray bake, chop some vegetables, sprinkle with a little bit of olive oil, sprinkle with some water, season, throw in some herbs, and then open a tin of chickpeas, rinse it, chuck those in as well and bake it. Those kind of quick easy meals take a bit of exploration and adjustment. Sometimes at the beginning of the program, we're overwhelmed with thinking about recipes and following recipes. But I would say that people that are new to the program and struggling with time and things, try and mimic as much of what you were previously doing, making small tweaks. Mashed potato, all you do is a bit of olive oil and a little bit of plant-based milk instead of your regular milk. There are just so many ways to keep eating some of your favorite easy meals, but by making simple substitutions to speed things up. Batch cooking is another way to do it. But I like using the occasional jar of sauce or tin of beans as a quick hack that can speed things up. I'm certainly useless at remembering to soak beans overnight and then cook them for hours. And I don't operate like that. I come down and I'm like, right, what are we going to eat? Got to throw it together really quickly. But I appreciate that it's difficult when you're starting the program. It feels overwhelming because you feel like you're perhaps in quite a different pattern from where you used to be.
Yeah, I suppose for people that have just been diagnosed, they've obviously had their whole lives and they're used to what they eat. They might eat something every week and now they're trying to find different alternatives. It can be tricky, can't it?
Yeah. And if you're anxious about, buying the ready meal you used to buy because you feel like you should be cooking from scratch, well, have a little think about what was that ready meal. How actually easy is it to mimic something at home? Can you throw a load of veggies into a tray, stick a piece of cod on top, bung it in the oven? There are some quite easy ways. And then what I also do to minimize energy expenditure is to make double. If I'm going to the trouble of making a meal, I'll make double so that I've either got 1 or 2 portions to freeze for later in the week, or it's something that can be pimped up for tomorrow night's dinner, or something that can be used for lunch later in the week or the next day.
So looking for potential alternatives and maybe planning ahead and doing some bulk meal prepping is what you would say.
Yeah. And things like soups are really good. They are quite quick. You can just use up any leftover old wilting vegetables and herbs, throw them in, make a big batch of soup and freeze it, and then you've always got that emergency meal. You just need a nice chunk of crusty bread to go with it, or you could just boil some rice and add some rice to it, or you'd have a salad on the side. So having a few sort of emergency easy meals in the freezer
having a backup.
Yeah,
definitely. Brilliant. So this question, again, it's in relation to coconut and saturated fats. It's quite a popular topic that we've had. This person has said, is there any difference in the fat contained in fresh coconut that can be sprinkled on food as opposed to coconut oils and cooked coconut? So this person is Indian and their dishes use lots of fresh grated coconut.
Yeah, so the fresh grated coconut still contains the coconut oil. The oil is obtained by compressing the flesh. And the coconut milk, I think, comes from boiling up and cooking the flesh. So yes, there is still fat in the coconut flesh, which I don't think they wanted to hear. But again, if you are used to cooking like this and this is a staple part, are there ways that you could perhaps reduce the amount that you use? So could it be like a tomato based curry instead, and could you perhaps just use much smaller amounts of freshly grated coconut just as a little garnish on top to help bring that flavor of coconut into the meal? Are there ways that you can look at reducing the actual portion, because if you reduce the portion, you're reducing the fat content as well by limiting the amount that you're eating.
Brilliant, thank you. So this next question, this person has said they've lost 7 kilograms on the Overcoming MS diet and don't want to lose any more. They eat a banana and nuts every day, but can you suggest any calorific foods or snacks that might be suitable for their diet or for the Overcoming MS diet that people can have?
Oh, okay. So, well, one of the things that nuts is a good one. Seeds are a good thing as well. Dried fruit, seed mix, trail mix, those kind of things. Olives are very rich in the monounsaturated fats, so they can help produce the give you a feeling of being fuller as well. Olives combined with nuts. Other good snacks, things like a tin of salmon, a tin of cannellini beans, a dollop of soy yogurt, some fresh herbs, a bit of seasoning, blitz it all up and turn it into a kind of dip.
Yeah.
And it's, it's reasonably high in calories. You stick your vegetable crudités in it, or some nice crackers, or some nice crusty bread. Nut butters as well on toast is another good calorie-rich food that's Overcoming MS compliant as well. And I think sometimes you need to look at the actual portion sizes. And if you're losing weight, you might be somebody who needs to have breakfast, a small snack, lunch, a small snack, dinner, a small snack. So you might be someone who's not used to eating a bigger plateful. And sort of protect yourself like that. Also, smoothies are a good mid-afternoon kick. You can add a dollop of almond nut butter in there. You can put chia seeds, flaxseed, ground flaxseed, oats, those kind of things in together, maybe with a bit of yogurt and some berries, and blitz all of that up. It's really maybe just to look at the quantity of what you're consuming, because a lot of the food on the Overcoming MS diet is naturally lower in calories, so we can eat more of it.
Great news. Definitely good news. Well, thanks for that one. How would you feel about some quick fire questions, Sam?
Yeah, sure, let's do it.
Bring it on. So the first one, are hemp seed hearts a good source of omega-3, and could you comment on omega-3/omega-6 ratios in certain foods? It's quite a long one, that.
Okay, yeah, less quick. Yes, hemp seeds or hemp hearts are a good source of omega-3, and I think hemp is one of those foods that's a very good balance of 3, 6, and 9. So they are a great food to include. So the second part of that question was commenting about
omega-3 and /omega-6 ratios in certain foods.
Yeah, so well, like I was saying before, no food is really all one fat or another. And omega-6 fats are also anti-inflammatory and anti-degenerative, unless we get too many of them, which can happen in a typical Western diet because of kind of the adulteration of the food chain and the reliance on refined carbohydrates and those kind of things. So the standard American and British diet that we all follow tends to be very high in omega-6, which tips the balance to becoming pro-inflammatory. So it's even more difficult to get the omega-3 to address that balance. But really, we're looking at something like the typical American diet is about 20-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. They say the paleo caveman was probably living with a ratio of 1-to-1. So in today's society, in an ideal society for the perfect Overcoming MS friendly body, we would be looking at something maybe omega-6 to omega-3 4-to-1.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
That means
no, definitely. Next quick fire question. If someone struggles to tolerate flaxseed oil, which alternatives would you suggest and in what quantities?
Interesting. I would suggest eating fresh walnuts daily. I would suggest having whole flax seeds or ground flax seeds daily as well. And I would definitely suggest the oily fish 3 times a week. Again, hemp seeds, and maybe even trying the hemp oil, a cold pressed hemp oil, which is a really nice balance of 3, 6, and 9. So all of them anti-degenerative oils. Omega-9 is this mono unsaturated fat like olive oil. The omega-6 component is there, but together with the other fats, we can assume it will be more anti-inflammatory. So I would say have a go with cold pressed hemp oil instead of flaxseed oil if you can't tolerate it. But the words "can't tolerate it" make me wonder if it's something that's literally tolerating, as in can't tolerate it because it's causing really bad gastric upset, or tolerate it as in the flavor's just awful, don't like it. Because if it's the latter, there's a good chance the flaxseed oil is rancid, and the one that you've chosen needs to be looked at. You should be buying a nice tasty flaxseed oil, that it's fresh, bottled in a glass bottle, a dark bottle, kept in the fridge. So if it's the latter, if it's the taste that you can't tolerate, then have a go with a few other brands. On the Overcoming MS website, it's the flaxfarm.co.uk here in the UK, which is a really delicious flaxseed oil. It's the first time I realized I liked the flavor of flaxseed oil.
Brilliant, brilliant. I'll have to try it. So, final quick fire question. Are there better and worse whole grains?
Are there better and worse? Interesting question. A whole grain, by definition, is a good thing because it's intact. It has fiber in it, has protein in it, it has essential B vitamins and minerals like zinc. I'm wondering if this question is driving towards the gluten versus non-gluten grains. For some people, gluten grains could be a less beneficial whole grain, if that's where the question's going. But I think that one of the real benefits of the Overcoming MS program is the fact that there is this emphasis on whole foods and plant-based foods. So the grains, and what's really important is not to rely too heavily on one grain or another, but to try and keep that variety there, because each different grain has got a different nutritional profile and will be broken down differently in the body and can help to encourage the growth of a much wider variety of friendly gut bacteria as well. So the more variety you have with your grains, the more you're encouraging healthy bacteria, which is indirectly calming MS activity. So I hope that's quick fire enough of an answer.
Yeah, no, definitely. So a variety of grains is better, basically.
Yeah, a good variety. Don't just stick to wheat, think about the different rices. What about the wild rice, the red rice? What about buckwheat? Have you tried quinoa yet? Just thinking all the different options, and each time you're introducing these different foods, you're encouraging variety in the microbiome, the healthy bacteria.
Perfect, thank you. So this next question, I'm finding by eating a lot of flaxseed oil, I'm having more frequent cold sores. Do you know how much lysine is safe to take per day, especially when I have a flare?
If you're having a flare of lysine, I think the recommendation is 3 grams. So they usually sell the supplements of lysine in 1,000 milligrams or 1 gram tablet size. And if you're someone who's prone to cold sores, then you could take 1 gram every day. And when you have a flare, you can increase that to 1 gram 3 times a day.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And this next question is about unrefined sugar. So this person has asked, can it be eaten in moderation or should this be avoided completely?
So I don't know if that person can quickly clarify unrefined sugar. I'm wondering if they mean something like the palm sugar, the one that comes like in a solid block for Asian cooking, or if they're thinking something like molasses, which is the sort of unrefined process of the sugarcane plant, the sugar beet plant. So those types of unrefined sugars are much higher in the natural minerals and nutrients, things like manganese, things like selenium. And so in that respect, they're bringing more to the body than just a refined white table sugar, which not only just causes a sugar spike, but actually depletes our own source of essential vitamins and minerals because it needs to be metabolized. So having an unrefined sugar at least is bringing in other nutrients rather than just a pure hit of glucose. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. So what I would probably say is our final question of tonight's webinar. It's definitely flown by this hour. It's quite a topical question. So this person has said, on a previous webinar, you talked us through some recipe ideas for families on a budget. And based on the current situation with the cost of living increases, etc., what would be some go-to dinners that you might recommend to a family or those wanting to cook on a budget?
Okay, well, the plant-based meals are obviously going to be some of the cheaper ones. And I make a really tasty bean casserole, which is essentially onions, garlic, celery, carrots, tins of chopped tomatoes, and then some tins of butter beans. But then I can either just add some chili flakes and make it a bit spicy, or I've got a little jar of chipotle, which I sometimes add, and that makes it nice and sort of hickory smoked. So you can sort of play around with the flavors of it, and kind of make it a bit different. You could change the beans in it, but the essential ingredients are all really cheap: tinned tomatoes, carrots, celery, onions, garlic. Then I also add to it anything that I'm trying to use up that's kind of going a bit wilty in the fridge. It could be some chard, it could be some kale, it could be an aubergine that's starting to look a little bit wrinkly, some red peppers. So that kind of base bean stew, I think, is one of the really cheap meals. And then again, I was talking about, I'm a big fan of these tray bakes with fish, because again, you can just change it up by using whatever veggies you've got in the fridge and putting a piece of fish. And it doesn't have to be a very expensive piece of fish. It could just be a piece of cod, and it doesn't have to be a very large piece of fish. Trying to shrink the portion sizes, and then adding extra veggies on the side. So I'll have a nice tray bake, maybe green beans, cherry tomatoes, maybe something like courgette, whack it in the oven, put a fish on top, a few herbs, and then I'll just do some rice on the side, some brown rice, and then and then I'll do some extra greens as well, something like some steamed broccoli and cauliflower. So the veggies are all really cheap, getting all the stuff from the greengrocers, and just kind of filling the plate with those cheaper foods and shrinking the portion of the more expensive proteins, which is often fish or seafood, but also looking in the freezer section. So you can buy these things frozen. It's much cheaper to buy a piece of frozen fish than it is the fresh. It's much cheaper to buy frozen prawns, and throw them into a big batch of shredded vegetables for a stir fry, which I just do with water and soy sauce and ginger and garlic. And then just having that with some brown rice. And I also put cashew nuts, a sprinkle of cashew nuts on top, a sprinkle of sesame seeds on top. So kind of boosting the protein and also the variety in the diet, but keeping the actual cost of the meal down, the expensive part of the meal, like the prawns, keeping that cost down.
Yeah, and I suppose the added bonus of obviously, as well as the cost being a little bit cheaper with frozen, it'll last longer for those people that might be on a budget as well. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
definitely.
and you can use
Well,
frozen veggies as well, using frozen veggies for a lot of these dishes as well, because they are, according to some studies, fresher than some of the stuff that's sat on the supermarket shelf for 10 days.
yeah. Well, I mean, all of this talk about food has made me very, very hungry. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the time now. That 1 hour did literally fly by, and we still have a lot of questions that we weren't able to answer. But I just want to say, Sam, thank you so much for your time. That was brilliant and just so informative. We've had lots of comments to say thank you as well, and people have really enjoyed it. And I'm sure we'll see you on another webinar probably very soon, and we can go through lots more questions.
Yay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks
All right.
very much. And thanks everyone for all the questions. It's always really good to share as much as possible and help clarify things for everyone.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Sam. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So just some closing remarks from me. Again, a big thank you to Sam for today's session. Hopefully you've enjoyed the webinar. And just as a reminder, you will receive a link to the recording via Zoom next week. I'd also like to say a big thanks to my colleague Sian, who has been supporting me in the background with all of the questions. And just to let you know that we will be back next month on the 20th of April at 12:30 p.m. UK time for an accessible movement session with Veronique Gauthier-Simmons. And you can visit our events page on the Overcoming MS website to register for that session. And I think all that's left for me to say is a final thank you for joining us today and wishing you a great week ahead. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.